Thank you, everybody, for coming. So what we're hoping is to entertain, to inform, to keep everybody engaged. And as such, what I want to do is I want to get some information from you guys before we get going here. So real quick, can I get a show of hands? Who is in the K-12 space? All right, cool. Commercial? I'm going to ask again. I did this yesterday. Government? Right. Okay. There we go. Sweet. All right. Representing. Cool. All right. How many people are familiar with the models of deployment? I know Joe talked about it yesterday a little bit in his presentation. People familiar with models of deployment that are common in the Apple world? Cool. All right. So then what I've been asked to do is we just want to get a show of hands. Who right now, given the information you have about the models of deployment, is familiar with the institutional model already? Cool. And are you deploying the institutional model? All right, handful, cool. And how about the personal ownership model? All right, cool. Thank you. That helps out. We're just trying to get a kind of a gauge here. We've got people in the audience monitoring, so we're just trying to get a gauge of what's going on. All right, so to move into the actual talk and get past that, my name is Dusty Dory. I am from Jamf Software. I'm on the education team, so you may have taken certification courses from me, or maybe some of the other people from my team. Probably 2 years ago now, 18. I had the pleasure of meeting Andy at a training for actually Apple training. So we were both being certified to be Apple trainers, and we got to know each other. Really good guy, and I've been able to keep in touch since then. And one of the things that I found out about Andy is he's kind of a rock star for iOS. Probably selling him up here a little bit, but Andy does some really cool stuff with iOS deployments. And when we were planning for the JNUC, getting ready for what the talks were going to be, what presenters we were going to have come, I actually reached out to Andy and asked him if he could present. And he's like, "No, man, I'm too busy. Got a lot of things going on." And I don't know, a month later, I reached out. I'm like, "No, seriously, you're going to come present at the JNUC, right?" And I'm still too busy. And finally, I basically sent him an outline. Like, "Dude, please come talk about this. I know you know it." Finally, he broke down and agreed to come and talk to everybody. So he's going to be talking to you about the institutional model. And I know, just looking around the audience, that some of you folks were in Joe Yamada's presentation yesterday, and he gave an overview of some of the different models, and it was really a good presentation. And what we're looking to do is we're going to take one of those models in this talk and do a little bit deeper dive and actually look at some of the tech, look at some of the steps and stuff that we're using with these 3 different tools. So that's what Andy's going to be doing, and I'd like if everybody could just give him a round of applause. Welcome Andy to the stage.
Thanks, Dusty. Appreciate it, man. Thanks. Okay, guys. Can everybody hear me okay, first of all? Good. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is deploying iPads in an institutional model. This, by far, is not the easiest way to send iPads out. For those of you who are doing it, I'm sure you absolutely know. But we're going to attempt to. But the first thing I want to start off with is let's all give a round of applause to Jamf Software for putting on an awesome event for us, as well as the Jamf Nation, because if you need answers to something, a lot of times Jamf Nation is where to go to get it. So a round of applause for the Jamf Nation members. So with that, let's jump into it. Like Dusty said, my name is Andy Beaver. I am the Apple/MDM administrator for the St. Joseph Public School District. It's in St. Joe, Missouri. So we're a relatively large school district. We have about 13,000 students. Currently, we have about 6,500 MacBooks or Apple laptops deployed. And we also have about 5,000 iPads deployed, all of which are not institutional. Just a small portion or a small section of about 2,000 iPads that we deploy are institutional. So some of the things that I guess I had originally in the beginning when I started to put this keynote together in sort of a hurry have already been covered really, really well by other presentations. So if you guys haven't had a chance, when the presentations are put online so that you can watch the movies, make sure you check out Joe Yamada's Getting Smart with Your iPad Deployment, as well as 7,000 iPads in 7 months. Those are great presentations that will kind of fill in some of the blanks that this deep dive presentation might leave out. So make a note of that. So getting started with our presentation agenda, the first thing I think is really important is I want to go back and I want to talk a little bit about the history. So what happened pre-Apple Configurator? Not a fun time to live in. So we're going to talk a little bit about history. We're going to talk about some of the pre-planning and some of the prep work that you really want to have in place to make your deployment go as smooth as possible. And then finally, we're going to really get into that deep dive challenge, and we're going to look at what are some of the tougher aspects about deploying iOS in an institutional model. And then finally, we're going to talk about that workflow. So we walk you through step by step of what you're going to do in Configurator and actually give you the recipe for what you need to deploy these iPads in an institutional model. So again, like we were talking about history, iOS isn't that old, especially when you think of it in terms of enterprise deployment iOS. Some of the tools that we had allowed us to have different models of distribution. So let's talk here about that. Sorry, guys. So some of the tools that we have, really briefly, we obviously have iTunes. We have Apple Configurator. Some of us still need to use IPCU or iPhone Configuration Utility. Those are all still viable tools along with Xcode. So let's jump in a little bit about models of deployment and just chat a little bit about that. Who all, show of hands, is familiar with this slide right here? Pretty much everybody. So really quickly to go over personal model. iPad comes out of the box, or maybe you leave it in the box, you hand it to the person, it's a complete personal ownership. They own their apps, they update all of their apps. Institutional model, what we're going to focus on today is where the institution owns and retains the licenses for their apps. And then the layered combination of both. So back to talking a little bit about the tools that we had. You can see on the left-hand side of the slide where in the beginning you had Xcode, IPCU, and iTunes. That's it. Who in here did a deployment with iTunes in the very, very beginning and had to use iPhone Configuration Utility to click install, 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 install? Not fun. So we fast forward a little bit to March 7th, and we see where we got Apple Configurator. Apple Configurator in its first release had really, really high expectations. Everybody thought that this was going to be the end-all, be-all, best thing, best utility that you can have to deploy iPads. It was so-so. We fast forward a little bit further. We're talking about Apple Configurator 1.2 in that era. Everybody thought, 1.2, man, we need that 1.2.1 release. It's going to fix all the bugs in Apple Configurator. It's going to fix everything. It didn't really fix everything, but it got better. We fast forward a little bit further to where we are today. We have Apple Configurator 1.4. A lot of new features and a few more bugs. That also coincides with iOS 7. So that's the thing to keep in mind is Apple Configurator is not that old. And if we look where we came from on the far left-hand side and where we are now, it's a pretty big jump. So enterprise iOS is getting there. We're getting there with Apple Configurator. So the next thing that we want to think about is an institutional model right for me? Is a layered model right for me? This is where you really want to kind of set your expectations for what is the public perception, what's the public's perception of what your iPads are supposed to do? What are your teachers' expectations of what these devices are supposed to do? What are the students' expectations? So all of that needs to be really kind of hammered out in the very beginning so that you can make an informed decision as to which model you want to do. If you want to give your students full control of the device, then a personal model might be the way to go. If you're going to have a ton of money spent in apps and you need to maintain ownership of those apps, or you plan on maybe using a global proxy or something along those lines, then you may want to look at a supervised layer model, or you may want to look at an institutional model like ours. So we'll talk a little bit about scalability of Apple Configurator. How many people, just real quick show of hands, have more than one instance of Apple Configurator in their building? Okay. How many people have 10? Okay. So Apple Configurator, the thing, it doesn't scale very well. It's a wonderful tool to have sitting on top of a cart, but in itself, it's not designed to scale extremely well. But there are some things that we can do, and we'll get into it when we get into our workflows, that will definitely improve the scalability of Apple Configurator. So we're also talking about VPP when it comes to which deployment model is right for you. Volume purchase program, it was great when it first came out. And then when we had Apple Configurator kind of coincide with the volume purchase program, we're starting to see where we once were redeeming one code and keeping the rest for a record left unredeemed. And then now when Apple Configurator comes into play, now we're using all of those codes. And if you guys have ever had the issue, app not authorized, all those fun time things, it really sort of affects the scalability, and it really affects kind of the whole end. It kind of puts a sour taste in your mouth when you start seeing all of those codes getting used, getting burned, that sort of thing. So VPP is something to keep in mind. If you have a ton of apps and a ton of iPads, it's really important. It's really important, I guess, to think if you have enough. If you have enough money to kind of recoup some of the cost of lost iPad or lost apps and that sort of thing, within maybe errors or something that could happen in an institutional model where you're bringing iPads back to Apple Configurator all the time, and where you might be losing some of those codes. So that's one thing to think about. Sorry. The other thing is app updates. So when we think about deployment, or think about personal model, we don't have to worry about app updates as a tech department. The end user updates those all together. They update, everything is owned by them. It's a personal model. Layered model, end users can update institutional owned apps as well as their own personal apps. But again, our focus is institutional. So just know that whenever you are putting apps on using Apple Configurator, those devices need to come back to Configurator in order to update apps. So just some different things to think about when you're actually making a choice to pick a deployment model. So you decided to go with an institutional deployment. The first thing that you want to do when you get the iPads, they're shipped to your door, you're picking everything up, you want to know thy enemy. And your number one enemy, if you're doing a large deployment, is cardboard. You are going to have boxes everywhere, everywhere. Boxes and little cellophane wrappers that they come in. So what we did to kind of make, I guess, good use of the cardboard is we broke the boxes down, we stacked them up, and we saved them. They're great for transporting the iPads once you get them all set up. They're great for storing them over the winter or for the over the summer. So they're really good. The other thing, the trays, the little trays inside the boxes, are your perfect Apple Configurator sink station stands. Other than the dish rack, the dish rack was good. The other thing that's just quick thing to think about, and like I said, other presentations may have done a better job of explaining some of these finer points of the deployment aspect. The other thing to think about is get an assembly line going. Get a game plan. Kind of have your own central receiving setup where you have the iPads come in, they get unboxed, they get maybe asset tags scanned, case goes on into the configurator station on down the line. So just think about those things. The other thing would be is that, as other presentations have said, to call in the reserves. Really reach out to PTA, reach out to all of the anybody volunteers, NHS, even student volunteers, to really bring everybody in and get a good handle so you have enough. It's better to have more help than not enough help. So call everybody in. And most of the time, the students are really, really anxious to get their hands just to touch these things when they first come in. And they touch them twice. That's the assembly line method. So just a few things to think about. OK, the important stuff. Let's get into the workflows. So we're going to talk about some of the necessary steps that you're going to need to do. Obviously, the first thing what we're going to do is we're going to create a restore, a backup, so that we can restore the iPads to the backup. We do this because we don't want to go through the setup assistant 15 times, or 1,500 times. And with respect to iOS 7 and doing restore from backups using Apple Configurator, tested it many times, iOS 7.02. That functionality does work when you restore iPads from a backup using Configurator. We're going to talk a little bit about Wi-Fi, how to get Wi-Fi profiles on. Also, we're going to do a little deeper dive into restrictions. Restrictions are definitely going to be one of those set your expectations or know what the expectations of the iPads are. In our deployment, we have our iPads, a portion of them, locked down about as tight as they can possibly go. I mean, they are still very functional, but very, very locked down. We're going to talk about adding apps, and then, of course, the enrollment profile. And one little quick thing about the enrollment profile. With the JSS 912, you are definitely going to need to break that certificate out separately from the wireless enrollment profile, so just something to keep in mind. OK. So this is a supervised backup. The first thing that we're going to need to do, obviously plug an iPad in. So an iPad out of the box, no apps, nothing. Plug the device into Apple Configurator. You can see it's going to show up in the prepare phase. So from this point, all we really want to do is just supervise this thing. We supervise it. As you can see in Configurator 1.4, we see a whole bunch of more information. So more information is always good when you're having to troubleshoot, which I'm sure you may have to troubleshoot at least a few times in Apple Configurator. It's just inherently happening. There is a defaults right command that will actually turn on high logging for Apple Configurator, and I'm sure we can post that to the session on Jamf Nation later. So if you really need to get into it and figure out and search in the console logs as to what's going wrong or what's happening, that high logging will give you a little bit more verbose look at it. So once you see the device, move over to the supervised stage. You'll see it pop in there. And it's one thing that might be important to note that in Configurator 1.4, the little stop button, I've had a lot of calls from techs saying, I can't see the device move over. It doesn't go over. So you have to click stop when in prepare phase. So neat feature if you're preparing a bunch of devices, but frustrating if you don't know that it's there. So once we get that device, we're just going to unplug it out of Apple Configurator. We're going to walk it through the first time in the setup assistant and choose all your appropriate settings in there. Once we get to a screen that looks similar to this, that's a bad screen there. So's that one. So you get to this screen that, uh-oh. You get to the home screen. I'm sure we all haven't seen that enough. So you guys saw the home screen. OK. Once we get there, device is still in. Apple Configurator, what we're going to do is simply just create a backup of it. That's all we need it for. We need it just so that we don't have to go through the setup assistant again. We're going to name the backup. In this example, the backup's named iPad. I tend to name my backups something that has the iOS version in it. just so it's a good reference. What instance of Configurator is it? What version of iOS is it? So. Okay, so, sorry guys. Okay, so now you guys can see where the restore backup actually shows up, and you have to note that supervision is turned on. So since this iPad, when we created a restore, when we created the backup, since it was supervised, the only devices that we can restore that backup to are, in fact, supervised devices. So, talk a little bit about Wi-Fi. So, is it just me, or does some people have an issue with maybe your enrollment profile not connecting or not enrolling because it doesn't have Wi-Fi? Is it just me? Okay. So, Configurator 1.4 and the JSS 912 are going to help us with that a lot. So, first step, create a profile. Create new, looks like this. You have to give it a name, obviously. Second step, you're going to fill in your Wi-Fi payload information. We don't do 802.1x Wi-Fi profiles for our iPads. We just don't. It's just, there's no use for us to really make it any more complicated than we have to. If your business or your institution relies on 802.1x for their iOS devices, it's certainly possible. It absolutely can be done. So before I go into restrictions, a note about configuration profiles. We try to make our profiles as granular as possible. So we don't have like a one profile fits all profile. We have a separate one for our Wi-Fi. We have a separate one for our restrictions. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to, I guess, see at a glance. If the kid's missing a profile, he still has Wi-Fi. Or if the kid needs, if we need to, with the profile, I have a story. So we have an iOS iPad sitting out there, and kid comes in and he's got, when we very first started deploying iPads, we deployed monstrous amounts of profiles. We had like 15 profiles with everything extremely granular and everything is extremely broken out. Kid comes in and he had, it looked like all of his profiles, but we were missing the web clip that went to our Power School. So kid comes in, I don't have my web clip, can't go to Power School. So text looking through, can't figure it out. So then this whole idea of having very, very granular profiles sort of evolved into, yes, we still want to stay granular so that we can still, push and remove certain things without removing everything. But it is okay to put some things, in a profile. It's okay to put a web clip in a restrictions profile or something like that. So, restrictions. What we want to think about is we definitely want to guide your users. So, if you lock a device completely down, if it's almost unusable, it's obviously not going to be much use to the kid. So you want to guide your users' behavior with the restrictions that you check. The second thing that you really want to do when you're going through making restrictions payloads is to watch your language. Some things are checked to allow, some things are unchecked to allow. So those are really important things to think about when you're making these configuration profiles. The third thing is, are you old enough? So another story, we had at our school district an app called Blogsy that we purchased almost en masse. We only purchased enough to just pilot the thing. The curriculum folks really want us to purchase this app, but it's a 17+ app. And the configuration profile that has the restrictions in there does not allow 17+ apps. So we could have spent $30,000 buying this app for district-wide and never been able to use it on the iPads. So it's really important that you work closely with whoever makes the decisions that purchases the apps that it's not going to conflict with whatever restrictions you have set in the iPad. Okay. Sorry, guys. So what we name, instead of naming the profile restrictions or, blocked stuff, we named it guidelines. So it's nice and, I guess, good for the kids. So we start out back in Apple Configurator. We're going to create a new profile, give it a name like guidelines, or give it a fancy name, whatever you like. The most important thing in an institutional model deployment, and probably the most valuable thing when you deploy something in an institutional model, is the fact that you can set the security to never, ever, ever come off the iPad. So MDM is opt-in, opt-out. Kids can just remove their MDM profile. With a true institutional deployment such as ours, kids cannot remove these profiles. So no matter what, if they delete their MDM profile, they're still going to have a lockdown device. Into some of the checkboxes here, this is actually what we do. So we don't allow FaceTime. We don't allow iMessage. Those are two big things that, with our younger students, we had some issues with, some problems with. So those are two of the big ones. And again, you can see the reason that we're allowing let me back up real quick. We also don't allow installing apps, and we don't allow deleting apps. So the only way that these devices can get apps is through Apple Configurator. Back to this slide. We have where it says apps, allow all apps, and the reason that we can leave that checked is because we are going to be putting the apps on, so we're making that decision for them. Apps. Okay, so in our district, we have a ton of apps that we buy for our iPads. The elementary schools have about 30 apps purchased per iPad. Works out to like $57 an iPad. The high school, they have a little higher app count. They're like in the 60s. Works out to about $110 an iPad. So one of the things to think about when you're the guy that has to buy these, maybe not make the decision on which ones to buy, but the one to actually go in the VPP store, enter the amount, click buy again, wait for the spreadsheet to come in. When you're the person that has to do that, you definitely want to plan for some time. You absolutely want to plan for time. The other thing that you want to do, and we'll get a little bit more into this here in a moment, is you want to buy your apps. So when you're buying your sheets of 50 or you're buying your sheets of 20, you're going to buy them per instance of configurator. So you're not going to buy a big sheet of 500 codes and then divide that sheet into however many instances of Apple Configurator that you have. Those need to be unique sheets per instance of Apple Configurator. And the pilot or swan dive thing, that was like the Blogsy. That almost could have been a swan dive, where we would have bought an app that was unable to run on any machine. Okay, and I don't know if throughput's a word or not, but it sounds like it might be. It makes sense when you see this. So this is an example of one elementary school, a 4th grade through 6th grade deployment. So in this school, we have 2 instances of Apple Configurator. We have a unique Apple ID per instance of Apple Configurator. We have unique code sheets per app per instance. So these 2 things basically take my 4th grade through 6th grade elementary deployment and split it in half. So if I had 1 instance of Apple Configurator in this school, I would only be able to do 30 iPads at a time. If I have 2 instances, I can do 60. So it's not the best, it's not the most efficient model, but the end result works for us. And this is a faster way to turn more iPads out than with just one instance. A lot more work creating the Apple IDs on the back end, and a lot more work managing the volume purchase sheets, but it works in the end. Okay, so the enrollment profile is just the standard enrollment profile. If you're going to enroll an iPad, no matter what model it is, using Apple Configurator, you're going to use the same enrollment profile that you would there. The only thing to mention is that that trust profile is separate in the JSS 912. And here's a look at how we go out and grab that profile from the JSS. It's just going to create it, give it a name. Here, what we do, as well as a lot of other deployments, is this location information is so useful. It's very useful. We go in and we break out our buildings. We add all the information as to which deployment does this iPad fall in, and that is such a big time saver if you ever have to use it later. You don't have to search for a configuration. We used to use dummy configuration profiles back in the day. So you would just make a profile with a payload, give it a name, and then create a smart group that just goes out and searches for any device that has a profile with this name. Much, much better, much more efficient, and much cleaner. The next slide. Purchasing information. Since some of our some of our iPads were purchased with title money, this was really nice to have. When we went in, we were able to separate out in the JSS and give accurate, really nice reports to the folks downtown as to which devices were broken and we needed to replace them. So what money should that come out of? So the purchasing information, another really good field to do. Once we have our enrollment profile, you can see the trust profile, and we'll just download the profile down to our Apple Configurator instance, appears in downloads, plop those into Apple Configurator along with our other profiles. Then we end up with something like this. One profile that we use that you don't see in there is an HTTP global filter, global proxy filter. So far, it works great. We're not having, I would say sometimes it works too great. So there's some tweaking that you're going to have to do if you do decide to use the global proxy filter. It blocks, at least in our case, it blocked almost everything right off the bat. So we did have some teachers, and there were some growing pains that went along with that. We had to go in and whitelist some stuff. But no complaints from me. It works pretty well. So then, what we're going to do is go ahead and run this. Sorry. Go ahead and run it. The apps tab, I left it out, but essentially, you're checking your apps to go on that device. And then next to your app, you're going to have a count of how many licenses you have remaining. And for each iPad that you set up, your app count should go down by 1. Once you end up with a screen, you have your apps, no setup assistant, you're here, activation lock since you've supervised the device using Apple Configurator 1.4, and its iOS 702 is not activated. And that's all I have.
See, I asked for a small stage, so we have to. I'm gonna have to go.
Say it again. Right now, we're still at 8.7.2, so we haven't upgraded. So we're not actually doing that quite yet with that JSS 9.1.2 or anything. We're still at 8.7.2 right now. So Dusty, you want to?
Well, I was just going to say, can you repeat the questions? Because I'm not going to be able to run across the other side. I think it's all taped off. So just repeat his question when they ask.
Say it again.
So my question was, when you do the enrollment profile, so you also improve the SSL cert?
Enrollment profile SSL cert. On the.
So are you referring to the trust profile?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do need to include the trust profile along with the enrollment profile.
Right.
Now, does the trust profile need to be third party or could it be self-assigned?
So actually, no. There's your SSL certificate that's on Tomcat is separate from what's in the trust profile. So they're actually going to be different certificates that they're related to. So, yep.
So it won't make a difference if that's using a third party or built-in? It should work.
You'll need to include the trust profile regardless.
So in the new version of Configurator, they have the ability supposedly to integrate with your MDM solution within the app. I have never actually seen that work with Casper in any way. I would love to see a demo of that, maybe.
Right. So in 1.4, we played around with that a little bit to see. We didn't have very good luck with it in the first go at it in 1.4, so we stuck with this method.
Okay.
I'll talk about that as much as I can in my session.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's more to come. So Kevin, what session was that?
What's new in Apple deployment?
Yeah, what's new in Apple deployment? Kevin White will be talking about some of those items. So there's going to be more information coming out about that, but check out Kevin's session for that.
A lot of new cool stuff.
If you're supervising a device, are you still locked to the Mac and configurator that you originally supervised it with?
Yes, currently. That's the way we are. That's the way that we. That's the approach that we took. And again, you probably want to go to what's new in Apple. But that's the approach we took. We didn't want the students to be able to plug the devices into anything other than the Apple Configurator instance.
Yeah, hit Kevin's session again on that one. Sorry.
NDA.
So how are you handling app updates? Are you having assigned times, like twice a year we'll get them all back and update the apps, or you're saying we've configured this for the year and you're going to use it that way?
I would love to be able to configure it for the year and then send them out, but it just doesn't happen that way. So what we do is we try to take the biggest problem that we have, one of the biggest problems we have, which is app updates, and sort of break that down into smaller problems, which is updating classroom at a time. So whenever it fits for a teacher, they can send their kid down to the library and then update apps. So we actually recruited the librarians at all the school and walked them through Apple Configurator, and they can do it just fine. So.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, what we did was we do the updates after hours, but we don't necessarily have to be there. We just remote into the machine that's doing the updates. So if they've got their iPads there and they've got them plugged in, they get the updates. If they're not all plugged in, they don't get the updates. So it really puts a lot of responsibility on them. If they want the app, they got to have it there. They got to have it plugged in. We can remote in after hours. It really doesn't take that long.
Absolutely. We do a lot of the same thing with just the Apple Remote Desktop. Just remote in. If you can see the devices that are plugged in and hit start.
Thanks. How many people use Apple Configurator here? Show of hands. Okay. I work for Apple, and I'm on the help team that writes the help for Apple Configurator and work with the engineers. A couple points. First off, if you're using the help, there's a feedback link now at the bottom of every page. We read that feedback on a weekly basis. Please send it back to us. If the help is not helping you, if it's not explained clearly, we want to know about it and we're going to fix it. Second, under the Apple Configurator menu, there's a direct link to configurator-feedback@group.apple.com. That goes directly to us and the engineers. If you have questions about that, it's not a direct helpline, help me fix this, but if there are suggestions and features and other things that you want, I suggest that you use that. Thank you.
There's another mic on.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. I just want a clarification of what exactly is a configurator instance.
So by configured instance, it's one configurator app on a device. You could have with one user. So say you have a tech account on your computer, like some sort of standard system account. You log in, launch configurator. There's a database, a configurator database that's created in the ~/library containers com.apple.configurator/ and it goes on and on and on. So that would be one instance with one Apple ID that's tied to that. So you should have one Apple ID, one local user, one database would constitute one instance.
I'm just curious to know if people have begun to use the Apple's caching service and sort of thinking about how that may scale out in the future. Say iOS 8 comes out, and at that point iOS updates are supported on this caching service. Curious to know if what people are thinking about for how that infrastructure might look.
I'm excited. What's new in Apple deployment would probably shed some light on that. Really excited though.
Just curious, have you, at this point, lost, due to hardware failure or anything, one of your Apple Configurator instances? And if so, what have you done to back it up to make sure that you haven't lost the investment of the apps?
That is a very, very, very good point. We use Time Machine backup on every single instance of Configurator we have. We have lost hard drives on machines, and a simple Time Machine backup and we're back up and running. The key is just to leave that thing plugged in. Get an external hard drive and Velcro it to the lid of the thing and leave it plugged in. Unplug it occasionally, but.
And real quick to piggyback on that, Apple actually maintains a really nice KB on what you should be backing up in relation to Apple Configurator. We'll get that link and throw it on the JNUC notes on this. But check that out. So if you're using Time Machine, if you're using some other type of backup solution, it just gives you that location to say, hey, make sure that these items are getting backed up. So we'll get that and throw that up there too.
Absolutely.
To piggyback on that, that's just backing up the data. What if the machine fails, like the logic board? Isn't Configurator tying it into the MAC address? So if my laptop dies or my computer dies, then I get a new logic board. I have the data on Time Machine. How do I move it over? Because it's still going to be looking for the MAC address of the machine that it originally set it up. Is there a way around that, or is there a K-base for that? Like, how's that work? Do I have to deauthorize everything and reauthorize? It's not like iTunes.
So
the configurator, I'll describe it. The configurator data on that is not tied to the MAC address of the computer. You're going to.
So we've actually lost whole we've lost logic boards and hard drives and that sort of thing on configured instances. You just restore your Time Machine backup and you're back up and running. I mean, it's that easy for us. I mean,
just to piggyback a little bit on that, Crash Plan works real well too. Free program, and we have like 72 sites in our district, so we'll do a centralized Crash Plan setup where we're pointing everything back to one central server, gets backed up every night. We've done restores on different machines and had no problem with putting the configurator back in there. And that KB article is great too. Mm-hmm. My question is, have you found a way to stop the iOS updates from reinstalling every single time? Like, so if a profile fails or you get an error on an app install, you know, it wants to reinstall the iOS update, and it's just driving me nuts. That's probably for the SE too over there.
So I think just so I'm clear on what you're saying, so when you plug a device in, it already has iOS 7.02, and when you plug it in again, it wants to re-download 7.02. We had a situation where that did come up, and what we did is we, first of all, we called Apple support, and we went in and we drilled down to where that is actually cached. So there's a folder, a caching folder, and what was in the caching folder, that IPSW file, actually wasn't the correct size, so something must have happened. And so when that went out to verify with Apple, it was failing checksum because it wasn't the correct size. So we removed that cache, and then that seemed to fix our issue. After it did have to download one more time, but after that, it seemed to work great. That may not solve that specific problem for you, but that's one thing that we did see that helped.
That's a good idea. I'll look into that. Another thing is, like in the supervised model, is it requires you to check for the update every single time. There's no option to not look for an update. Where unsupervised, you can choose never look for updates.
So I think you actually, go ahead, Dusty.
Yeah, that's just going to be one of those things you're going to have to give the feedback on. Yeah. Give the feedback.
Anybody else over here? Questions?
You mentioned the issue that you had with the profiles installing and getting the error messages, specifically with the JSS enrollment profiles on there, so it would enroll automatically with that profile. But I didn't hear that you went into the issue of how to solve that problem.
So there's a couple things. Like when we are still currently using 8.7.2. You just want to make sure that your Wi-Fi profile is going on first. So one way that you can do that, and correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe this is just coincidence, but Apple Configurator, the last profile to be drug in is the first one to be installed. So is that right? Because it seems like what we end up with is we take, if we see that coming or we see that problem, we take the Wi-Fi profile, drag it back in, replace the existing one, run it, it's fine.
Yeah, just real quick on that. There's been a pretty big change between 8.7.2 and 9.1.2 as far as the enrollment profiles go. So what you should see in the 9 series now, with having those two items broken out, the enrollment profile and the trust profile, is you should see more consistent behavior in regards to our enrollment profile being treated as an MDM enrollment profile and being put at the last item in the list, regardless of the order of operation used to bring things into Apple Configurator. So when we're seeing that, Andy's spot on. Yes, you do need to make sure your Wi-Fi happens first. I guess I've seen pretty consistent results in bringing things in the order that I want them to be installed, but that was with the 8 series. With the 9 series of the product, you have the 2 different profiles, enrollment and trust. Make sure you bring both of them in, but you should see that enrollment profile treated as an enrollment profile. It should get put last, and this should help ensure that Wi-Fi connection is established before the iOS device tries to enroll.
And in our test environment, that's exactly what we've seen with 9.
So, I don't know if this is an idiosyncrasy on my network, but I noticed that even if the Wi-Fi profile is installed, and I haven't even tried the enrollment profile, and I'm still at Casper 8.7, if I install the Wi-Fi and then I lock to app and I choose an app like Atomic Learning that goes right to the web, I lock to app and then I install the JSS because for whatever reason, the Wi-Fi doesn't get activated. And as soon as you pull out the iPad and look at it, oh, look, it's working. But it doesn't wake up or something, and I don't know what's causing it. But I lock it to app to a web app on the iPad, install the enrollment profile, and then unlock the app, and it works perfectly. It takes an extra sync, but it's a bizarro workaround that works.
So just
first with profiles. What we actually did was we actually, in Configurator, we just numbered them. So they tend to pretty well install in that order. It doesn't sound like that behavior is consistent for everybody, but that's what we did to get around that.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard that as well, and that works. So,
and then questions, more of just sort of general. I'm curious. First of all, about updating to JSS 9, but it sounds like you haven't done that yet, so I'll leave that one out. But as far as updating from 6.1.3 to iOS 7, any caveats, advice, gotchas?
yes. So one of the biggest things if you're going to upgrade from 6.1.3 all the way up to 7.02, unsupervise that iPad first. So definitely don't OTA update those things. Unsupervise them first. Make sure you have a fully patched Configurator 1.4, fully patched iTunes, running 10.8 on a machine. Go back and just start over from there.
How much does the workflow change in an unsupervised model? With, if you chose unsupervised, and you just because you wanted the ease of setting up the iPads, like so you don't have to touch everything, you just
Right.
want to, and then let them run after that. Can you do that? Can
So-
you follow a lot of the same steps?
So in like if you want like a personal model, like you want a personal model
Yeah,
deployment?
kind of, but just to use, like to set up to use the configuration profiles to set up the Wi-Fi, to do the basics, and then deploy it unsupervised.
Gotcha. Are you putting apps on it at that point in time?
No.
Because there might be a better way to do that with not using Apple Configurator. You could probably do that exclusively with just enrolling the device in the JSS and
Right.
utilizing that to
That's what I've been playing
to
with,
work
yeah.
that model. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi. What is your protocol for whenever a student drops an iPad, as far as their app data, for lack of a better term, on there, your app licenses? I mean, what do you normally do whenever that happens?
So what we do, student brings in an iPad with a cracked screen. If we can get it in Configurator, if it will turn on, we can plug it into Configurator and unsupervise that device or remove the apps off of that device so that it puts the app codes that were on there back into the pool. Absolutely. That's a first step to do. If we can't, we just remove that record out of our configurated database.
What about the work that has been done if they have a project on there?
So our students are using Google Drive that syncs up with their Gmail accounts, their institutional Gmail accounts, and they're pushing a lot of their work to there. So,
okay, that makes
so if they need to get it, they can get it anywhere.
Gotcha.
So did I hear correctly that you had it where you went into the MDM profile and made it not removable, like select to never?
Right.
Okay. Is that a feature between 8.7.2 and 9? Because I tried that. We've had an issue with kids removing their MDM profiles.
Well,
and when we go to do that and you actually go click on the profile in Configurator, it says you can't edit this MDM profile, like you're permission denied, essentially. You can't edit it.
Right, so we don't, for with this section of iPads, these supervised iPads that are going out in this really strict institutional model, we don't necessarily use the JSS for much. We use it pretty much for reporting, that sort of thing. So we wanted to make sure that even if a student were to unenroll their device, that there is no way that they're going to go out into the world without first going through our proxy filter and without having those guideline restrictions on there for them. So that's why we don't really have any intentions of removing those profiles through the JSS or anything like that. So, and those profiles don't even exist in our JSS.
You're not flagging the MDM profile as non-removable. You're flagging
Absolutely
the
not.
restrictions.
No.
That's
No,
the
sorry.
difference. Yeah, the MDM profile is signed. So.
At the moment, can they still get essentially selected?
Yep. But with that, then, if you have anything else tied to it, your Wi-Fi configuration profile for your production, all those types of things would go along with it. So dangle the carrot, right? You lose MDM, you're losing everything else.
And that's the model for the rest of our deployment is that dangling carrot model. So.
Just as a real quick follow-up to what you were just saying, one of the things that we found that worked well for us was with the newer version of Configurator, you can set a time limit on the Wi-Fi profile. So we set the profile for the Wi-Fi to only work for about 4 or 5 weeks, which was when the students got back into school, at which point the JSS had pushed down to it a Wi-Fi profile for them to actually connect with. So as soon as they remove that MDM profile, Wi-Fi's gone. They can't get to it. But then the restriction profile that they're putting on at St. Joe's, you leave that as never. So even if they do want to enroll and they go to Starbucks, they still can't get access to restricted apps or anything, you know, age inappropriate.
So we talked about locking down the devices and a lot of tools that we can use. Now, in the last month or so, we saw headlines about LA and how the kids hacked them. Does anybody know the real story behind that? Were they just not properly set up, or? No. Okay, so they weren't supervised, or they weren't properly set up. That's basically what it comes down to. So they didn't properly place the restrictions or lock down the restrictions. Everything was done through the MDM. Okay.
We sort of have it set up exactly the same way you do, running JSS 8.7.2, Apple Configurator 1.4 with iOS 7. What I've ran into, get it all set up, supervised mode, get a cart set up, perfect. All apps, everything's running good. The problem that I'm running into is when we get those iPads plugged back in, come back to Apple Configurator, put them back in supervised mode to get them, you know, say if a student removed an MDM or changed the desktop or something like that. Supervised mode is supposed to come back to that backup, right? As soon as it gets plugged back in the Apple Configurator, it gets on a roll for the MDM, my wireless drops, and basically it starts over. I've been in contact with Apple. I guess that they said it's some kind of bug they can't figure out. I've talked with Jamf. They said Apple said it's up and coming update for Apple Configurator. I don't know if you ran into that similar situation or if anybody else has.
Haven't yet.
Haven't yet?
Luckily, yeah, we haven't ran into that yet. So.
One thing is an FYI, and I'm wondering if anyone here has gotten a similar email from their Apple SE in their area. My SE about a week ago sent me an email saying that for all those that upgrade from 6 to 7 and have lost that supervision profile, that Apple might have a way to deal with that with either a preparation profile for those who haven't upgraded yet or for those that have, a way to re-supervise the device, but that it's dependent upon providing them some information, and it may also be dependent on a yet unreleased iOS update. Has anyone else gotten a similar email message? Okay, yeah, I just got that, and I'm like, okay, what do I do with this? Stay tuned, or yeah? Because I've had a few people jump the gun and OTA their iPads to iOS 7 and lost the supervision profile, and my answer has been thus far, wipe the daggone thing. I would prefer to not do that, but you know, what else do I do?
Just a note, I've received that same and been in contact with AppleCare, and they have assured me that that there's an update coming within the month that's going to fix the problem with the OTA update and the unsupervising of the devices. We'll see if that happens, but that's we'll wait and see is kind of their AppleCare's stance on it at the moment. The status of my support case went to pending iOS or software update is going to be what fixes it. So we'll see what happens.
All right, cool. Looks like we're getting pretty tight on time. I don't want to run into the next session. The general thing that I'd like to encourage everybody to do, use those feedback mechanisms. Use feedback mechanisms with Jamf software. Use feedback mechanisms with Apple as well, as you're informed of. So use that. Give them as much information as possible, and just keep working on it. So,
Thanks, guys.
thank you.